The day the forest took revenge. The day the forest took revenge. Episode 1 by Cantorin. Ah, there you are. Welcome. I was beginning to think you'd wandered off for good and found some other fool with a fire and loose tongue. Last time you were here, you said to me, if you ever think of a proper story, save it for me. Well, wanderer, I've been saving one. Come in. Shut the door. Keep the draught out. Cloak on the peg, boots by the hearth. The stool still remembers you. See how it creaks in greeting? Sit, let the heat crawl back into your fingers. The woods feel long tonight. You've seen the lake on your way here. Hard thing to miss. We call it the lake because that's the word we have, but it's bigger than the word deserves. You can stand on the shore on a clear day and see nothing but water and sky. No hint of the far bank. You can walk from dawn to dusk along its edge and still be looking at the same grey sheet, curving away beyond sight. A big enough piece of water that, if it ever got angry, it could swallow more than just a few boats. People around here treat it carefully, like something vast that happens to be sleeping. I've been a woodsman here for 40 years, but this happened way before my time. 200 years ago, someone decided to take what grew along its edge. The lake disagreed. There was a lord in those days. His name's washed away, but the type is the same as ever. Hands soft from holding pens instead of tools. Eyes that see trees as tall coins waiting to be stacked. He came up on the rise above the water and didn't seem to notice the way the mist lingered there longer than it did anywhere else, or how the trees facing the lake leaned inwards, as if listening to a distant whisper. He saw straight trunks in long lines, marching along the shore. Good timber, the sort of man in a stone hall thinks he is owed. Those, he said to his clerks, we'll start with those. The villagers tried to stop him in the only ways people like us ever can. Not the lakeside grove, they said. Those trees are old. No one remembers a time before them. He gave them one of those polite little smiles the kind lords put on like a cloak. Age, he said, is no reason to leave good wood standing. So he sent for woodcutters from another town, men who'd never been told not to sing by this lake at dusk, who'd never watched the mist roll in and thought better of throwing stones. They arrived with new axes and easy laughter, shrugging at the tightness in the villagers' shoulders. In the village, there was a girl called Merith. Thin, watchful thing, the sort of child who hears the shape of silence as clearly as most hear sound. She used to sit on the path that runs above the water, arms around her knees, watching the lake breathe. Slight ripples, long sighs. The trees by the shore are watching, she told the old woman who lived closest to the water. When I look away, I can feel them all leaning closer. The old woman frowned and set her jaw. Don't say such things, she snapped, and don't loiter there alone. There's work to be done. But Merith kept watching anyway. On the morning the hired woodcutters went down to the lakeside trees, the world felt wrong. The lake lay flat as beaten pewter, not a single ridge of wind on its face, though up on the hill the air was restless enough to tug cloaks sideways and send smoke from chimneys in strange directions. The birds were quiet. The sky was bright and empty. But the air had that heavy taste it gets before a storm, as if it were holding something in its mouth. Merith was on the slope above the shore, pretending to look for late berries and really watching the path. She saw the men come into view, 6 of them, axes on shoulders, walking with the unbothered stride of people who trust steel more than stories. She opened her mouth to shout. She never worked out afterwards what she meant to say, and the world moved faster than her voice. The mist rose, not the soft, creeping kind that licks along the ground at dawn. It came up all at once from the whole vast face of the lake, like breath released after holding still for far too long. One heartbeat, the shore was clear, stone, root, bark, dark water stretching out forever. The next, white rolled in from the surface in a solid wall, swallowing the first line of trunks, then the second, then the path itself. It poured between the trees as if the lake itself were walking inland. The leaves tore loose, every dead leaf lying in the hollows, every brittle scrap of yellow still clinging to a branch, jumped into the air. They spun into tight little columns, thin whirling towers of colour along the water's edge, twisting so quickly they blurred, gold and brown and copper, flashing in the grey like coins tumbling in deep water. Then the sound came, a low boom at first, deep and slow, as if somewhere far below that huge surface, something had struck a great metal plate. With a careful hand, it rolled through the trees, through the ground, up into Meredith's bones. Her teeth hummed. The woodcutters staggered. Over that deep note slid another sound, high and piercing, bright as a blade. A thin, unwavering tone that seemed to come from inside the skull instead of outside. Not a voice, not a scream, just a sharp, clear line of sound that scraped at thoughts and peeled them back. The men crumpled. One dropped his axe and clapped his hands over his ears, eyes gone wide and unfocused. Another doubled over and retched, his body trying to reject something that wasn't in his stomach at all. A third began to laugh, not with humour, but with that awful, bubbling laugh that means something important has snapped. They ran. Not away from danger exactly. You can't run away from what you can't see, but away from the direction their bodies refuse to face. They tripped on roots that hadn't been where they remembered them. They crashed into each other, shoved, clawed, pushed. Somehow, fighting the mist, the sound, their own panic, they found their way back along the path and into the village. They came staggering in with blood at their noses and in the corners of their ears, faces grey under the sweat. They spoke of sound in their bones pressing from the inside out, of leaves whirling so thick they felt them scraping against their lips and teeth, trying to force their way into mouths and nostrils of mist so heavy they didn't dare open their eyes for fear it would fill them. No one slept easily that night. Doors were barred. A few lamps burned till dawn. Out beyond the fields, the lake lay unseen and unspoken of under the dark. The Lord listened to all this and heard nothing that questioned his right to take what he'd decided was his. Villagers, he said carefully, are not fond of strangers cutting their wood. Someone has made tricks, pipes hidden in the ground, perhaps bells, nets of cloth for the smoke. I will not be made a fool of. Once a man like that decides what the world is, it takes a lot to convince him otherwise. He sent soldiers the next day. They rode in leather and iron, heavy on big horses whose nostrils flared at the smell of lake wind drifting through the village streets. Their orders were simple as a blunt blade. Guard the woodcutters, find the trick, punish the guilty. They went from house to house, pushed open doors, turned out cupboards, tipped over chests, looking for pipes, drums, coils of rope, anything that could be blamed for sound and mist and fear. They found nothing. of course, but they left bruises behind, purple fingerprints on arms, blue smudges on the shoulders. Fear doesn't like leaving empty-handed. On the third morning, they tried again. Soldiers in front, cloaks hanging dark, spear points catching the thin autumn light. Woodsman behind, axes tucked in tight, eyes fixed straight ahead. No jokes now, no laughter. They set off along the forest path that leads to the lake. The vast water was hidden from them by the trees, but you could feel, even in the village streets, that something out there was waiting. From the slope above, Meredith watched them go. She told herself to turn back, to go where there were roofs and walls and people who didn't listen to air the way she did. Instead, she slipped in among the trunks, keeping to the upper path, moving in their shadow. Step after careful step, until she reached a place where the trees thinned and she could see the shore. The lake stretched out beyond them, huge and dull, swallowing half the horizon. It looked like a piece of sky that had fallen and never climbed back up. The mist rose. This time there was no sense of hesitation, no warning. It burst up from the surface in massive rolling banks, taller than the tallest pines, piling up on itself as it rushed inland. In a heartbeat, the leading soldiers vanished. Then their horses went, swallowed mid-stride. The mist poured between the trunks, closing gaps, filling the spaces where air had been. The temperature dropped so fast, Meredith's breath turned to white ghosts in front of her face. Her fingers, gripping a low branch, went numb. The leaves lifted again, not just in thin spires now, but in great spirals that wrapped around trees and plunged through the columns of mist. Bands of spinning colour encircled the riders, streaking gold and rust and dark red through the white, like veins. The deep boom came back, louder, closer, once, twice. Each strike seemed to land directly under her heart. The ground quivered, bark shivered on the trunks. Birds exploded from the canopy in a roar of wings, racing away from the water with no thought for direction. The high note lanced between those heavy blows, sharper than before. It slid in under armour, through cloth, straight into the part of a person that knows when something is terribly wrong. Meredith dropped to her knees and pressed her palms over her ears. The sound didn't care. It lived inside her head now, a bright, painful line, rattling the bones of her skull. The horses screamed. That sound cut clean through everything else. Men can hide their fear under orders. Horses have no such habits. They reared, hooves flailing at nothing. Some spun into trees, crushing the riders' legs. Others went straight up and over, slamming men into the ground so hard they bounced, leather tore. Reins snapped. Helms went rolling like kicked pots. The lucky soldiers hit the earth hard, rolled and chose their fear well. They ran. They couldn't see more than an arm's length ahead of them. The mist was that thick. It pressed in from every side, cold and wet and heavy, turning the world into a white, suffocating maze. But they ran anyway, stumbling, tripping, clawing their way away from the roar and the ringing and the spinning bands of leaves. The less fortunate. In the thinning moments between mist banks, Meredith saw shadows, dark human shapes swaying, reaching out with hands that found nothing. A figure turning in place, again and again, as if trying to face every direction at once. The fog folded around them, muffling even their voices, if they were still shouting. The booming blows of that unseen gong came less often now, slow, satisfied. Then there were no more moving shapes at all, when the mist finally began to draw back towards the water, dragging long grey scraps of itself through the trees, the forest edge stood empty. No soldiers, no woodsmen, no sound but the quiet, dazed chirping of birds daring to test their voices again. And then the horses came. They burst from the fading fog in scattered little groups. 3 here, 2 there, 1 alone, then 4 more together. Tack hanging loose, saddles twisted, flanks streaked dark with sweat. Their eyes rolled white. Foam flecked their mouths. They ran like things being chased by something only they could still hear. They pounded up the path past Merith, hooves chewing up the earth, and thundered on towards the village. Some of those horses, they say, would stand to a human hand again after a long time, and a lot of gentling. Others never would. They lived out the rest of their days skirting fields and houses, grazing where they pleased, flinching at sudden sounds, letting no rope near their necks. The men who had ridden them in were simply gone. No broken spear snagged on a rope, no shred of cloak caught on bark, no helm washed up at the shoreline, no boot abandoned in the mud. Searchers walked the edges of the lake for days, calling names into the mist that still lay thicker over that water than any other. The lake lay there, vast and flat, and gave them back only their own voices. The Lord raged, shouted himself hoarse in his hall, accused the villagers of witchery, conspiracy, treachery. But when it came to sending a fresh troop down to stand where the others had vanished, even his bravest men found other duties that suddenly needed doing. Word walked the roads, other lords heard. Quietly, their plans changed. There was plenty of timber to be taken from forests that did not answer with mist and sound when you pressed too hard. The trees by that lake were left alone. Time went the way it always does. The worst of the bruises faded. Children who had watched horses run past without riders grew tall and pretended not to remember what they had seen. The lake went on breathing its slow, wide breath against the shore. But the story did not soften. Not really. The next autumn, when the heat finally bled out of the earth and the first leaves turned, Merith took a lantern and walked up to the hill above the village. Others followed, maybe out of curiosity, maybe because their bones felt too tight with all that unspent fear. At the crest, she stepped into the open. She moved the way the leaves had moved that day, circling, lifting, falling, boots scuffing a pattern into the dirt, cloak wrapping and unwrapping around her legs. The lantern swung from her hand, tossing a ring of gold across the ground. "Let this be thanks," she said, voice carrying in the sharp air, "for being spared, and a warning, so we remember where not to cut and what not to wake." For a while they just watched. Then, one by one, they joined her. Awkward steps at first, feet out of time. Someone started to clap. Someone else hummed a line of melody that curled back on itself, like mist rolling over water. The fear settled into something else. Not gone, no, but shaped. Given a place to live that wasn't inside the dark of each person's chest. The year after, more people came. Someone brought a drum. In the next village over, they heard about the hill dance and tried their own. Then the custom walked on, down the road and across the lowlands, carried in the feet of travellers and the tongues of those who like to talk. Now, when autumn comes to these parts and the trees turn to copper and gold, you'll see it. Dusk gathering under branches, a circle of lanterns, people stamping patterns into the ground, turning in time with one another, hands joined and released, voices rising on a tune that twists back on itself, again and again. Ask them what they're doing, they'll laugh and say it's nothing, just a harvest thing, just an excuse to dance before the cold sets in. If you linger after the music slows, if you stay up on a hilltop where the fires below look like scattered coals, find the oldest person still awake and watching. Ask, very softly, why some still call it the autumn golden dance. Ask if they remember the year the horses came home alone, and the lake spoke with sound instead of waves. Watch what happens in their eyes. There, wanderer, that's the story I kept back for you. Warm your hands. Listen to the wind in the trees beyond the walls and tell me it doesn't sound, just for a moment, like breath moving over a vast dark surface. And if, someday on the road, a tune finds you that tastes of cold mist and swirling leaves and hooves pounding without riders, you'll know which night by this hearth it belongs to.